Hello, guys, and welcome to MedCheats. Today, we are going to discuss a very beautiful and very interesting topic which we called as a cardiac cycle. So, cardiac cycle is basically divided into four phases as you can look into the screen, and it's made up of zero point 0.8 second. So, it's very shorter, and we are going to discuss each and every phases of the cardiac cycle in depth, in detail, so you can understand better and you can write well in the examination. So let's begin the cardiac cycle. So first of all, the bloods come from the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava from different organs. If the organs are present above the neck region, then the blood will come from the superior vena cava, and from below the neck the blood will come from the inferior vena cava. So this is two main basic vein. So from this the blood will come into right atrium. So this one is a right atrium, and from right atrium it will goes to right ventricle. So this is right ventricle. So this is the deoxygenated blood which is moving from right atrium to right ventricle through a valve we call as a tricuspid valve, which is an example of atrioventricular valve. So the first phase is mid to late ventricular diastole. So first of all, we need to understand what is the diastole and what is the systole. So there is a one beautiful trick which we are going to discuss here, how to remember systole and diastole. So systole, if we write the word systole, it starts with the S. So if the bird is flying on in the sky, okay, so bloody is have to do a hard work. So basically to contract, to move their feather to be in the sky. So what we will do, it's a contraction, because you can't do the contraction without bare minimum work. And the second term is diastole. Diastole means the bird is in down in the ground area. So do blood need to do any hard work in the ground area? No. So it means relaxing phase. So this is how I remember the systole versus diastole, and for you it's easy to remember like this. So let's begin. So the first phase is mid to late ventricular diastole. The word itself saying ventricular diastole means the ventricles are getting relaxing. Relaxing means feeling. We can say the relaxing means feeling. Okay. So what is happening here? Basically the atria is contracting and the ventricular is relaxing. So if atria is contracting, it means the blood will come into the right ventricle from right atria. So what will happen in the first phase, mid to late ventricular diastole? Basically, there will be a period of ventricular filling. So if we look into the atrial versus ventricular pressure, what will happen? The atrial pressure will be much higher. The atrial pressure will be higher than the ventricular pressure. Why? Because atria is contracting. Okay, now if we compare the ventricular versus arterial pressure, so the arterial pressure will be much higher. And if we look into the AV valve will be, of course, it will be open. It will be opened. Why AV valve is opened? Because at the same time, the blood is moving from right atria to right ventricle. So do we need to open tricuspid valve? Yes. So what is the tricuspid valve? It is a AV valve. And at the same time, semilunar valve, the pulmonary semilunar valve and the aortic semilunar valve which will be closed. So in which phase we see the mid to late ventricular diastole? Of course, it will be a P wave. So this will indicates the P wave, which means the atrial contraction. Okay. So now the blood already came into right ventricle. So we will now discuss the isovolumic contraction, the second phase, isovolumic contraction. So what is isovolumic contraction? Okay, the word itself is saying now the ventricles are getting contracted. Why it's written isovolumetric? Because the volume, the amount of blood which already came in the ventricles, so it's a volumetric contraction. So now it will contract. So what do you think, which pressure will be higher here, atrial or ventricle pressure? Of course, the ventricular pressure will be higher. Why? Because ventricles are getting contracted. And if we compare the ventricular versus arterial pressure, the arterial pressure will be higher because still artery is working very hard. And AV valve, it now closed, while SLV valve is also closed. Okay, so if AV valve closed after opening from the first phase, what we called the first sound as a lub. So this one is our heart first sound lub, which came from the closure of the AV valves. And in EKG, what does it significant? It will significant the QRS complex. QRS complex, because there will be a ventricular depolarization. Okay, so now we'll look into the third phase. So there will be a mid to late ventricular systole. So what happening is here, now the ventricular will get eject the blood. Ventricular will eject the blood. So the word itself is saying ventricular systole, means the contraction of the ventricular. Okay, so what will happen here? The ventricular pressure will be much higher. Ventricular pressure will be much higher. And if we compare the atrial pressure versus ventricular, arterial pressure versus ventricular pressure, the ventricular pressure will be much higher because the ventricles are getting contracted. So AV valve, of course, it will be closed. And SLV valve, now it opens. Okay. And what does its significance in the EKG? Of course, the QRS complex. And the fourth and the last step of the cardiac cycle, or the phase of the cardiac cycle, is volumetric relaxation. So what we'll hear, it is an early stage of the ventricular diastole. It means the ventriculars are getting relaxing. So now what will happen? The atrial or ventricular pressure will be higher. Of course, the ventricular pressure will be higher. And here the arterial pressure will be higher. AV valve, of course, it is closed. And SVL valve, previously it was open, but now it will closed. So what another sound it will make? The second sound, dub. Dub. So the second sound is dub. And in EKG, what does it significant? It will significant the T wave. So this is the whole cardiac cycle which takes place, and the lub is produced in the second phase, which is isovolumetric contraction, and the dub is happening in the fourth phase, which is isovolumetric relaxation. So this is all about cardiac cycle, and we will meet with another new video. Thank you for watching.